What's going on, fellas? We are back with Hot and Cold Takes number 2, where you guys share your controversial strength and sport opinions with me, and I give you my thoughts on them, whether I think they're a hot take, a cold take. You guys gave me some pretty spicy ones this week, so hopefully I don't get myself into too much trouble, but I guess that's the whole point of the series. So thank you guys for your participation as always, and if you go through the week, you see something on Instagram that you disagree with, that a lot of people seem to agree with, you're like, it appears I have a controversial opinion. Please remember little old Sam and drop your controversial opinion into next week's bin. I'm going to post up on the community for the next one because I'm enjoying the series. It seems like you guys are enjoying the series. If you're liking it, here's your friendly reminder to like the video because that seems to make a difference. But we got quite a few today, so we're going to get straight into those. The first one, which, man, I'm shocked we didn't get this in the first video, but powerlifting competition should only have one style of deadlift: sumo deadlift or conventional deadlift, not both. Reasoning: the sumo deadlift is a different lift than a conventional deadlift. I'm well aware they're both deadlifts, but the leverages are different, and I believe this is a poor way of comparing lifts when it comes to a competitive environment. I know the whole sumo versus conventional is a controversial topic, but I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that they are different lifts based on different leverages. For example, the incline bench press and a flat bench press are both upper body pressing exercises, but since the leverages are different, they would never be compared in a competition environment, which they aren't. Okay. Oh, and he also mentions that he pulls more conventional, so he's not just saying that sumo's easier. That's not what he's saying. He's saying that they are not an apt comparison of strength. And the first thing I'm going to tell you is I don't think this is a change that could ever be practically implemented because we don't need more division within the sport of powerlifting. Powerlifting has become a little bit more interesting because there's less federations, there's less variety in what passes for a lift, there's less different, I've got this fed world record. We don't need more divisions. We already have 1 billion age divisions, 1 billion weight divisions. It's kind of hard enough with the size of the sport currently to find head-to-head competition. So more division, not great. And I don't think this is a hill worth dying on that's worth settling for more division within the sport. And here's why. You said the leverage changes, so it's not an apt comparison of strength. Well, we could say the same thing about the other lifts. If we have some guy who's coming in close grip benching without an arch, the leverages are changed substantially. You know, just like you said, an incline bench and a flat bench wouldn't be compared because you're pressing at entirely different angles. If someone has an adequate arch, it's a decline press, versus the guy without an arch, it's a flat press. So the same thing could be said, and we would have to differentiate between all of the lifts, which would be a massive pain in the ass. Much the same, someone who is squatting high bar from a moderate stance, there's a very good argument to make that the leverages are changed so substantially when you go low bar wide stance that you could argue it's a different lift, and I don't think you'd be entirely wrong. If we were bodybuilders and you were kind of creative, a little bit creative with your programming for a bodybuilder, I think we would very much view a high bar medium stance squat as a different exercise that's meant to emphasize entirely different muscle groups than a low bar wide stance. So I don't think it's unique to the sumo versus conventional. And then another guy mentioned the whole like one is easier than the other, and I'm gonna drop my part of my take, which is that I think the difference between the two is substantially less dramatic when we're looking at a stiff bar. Just by the nature of a good conventional deadlift, the most difficult portion is off the floor. So when we use a deadlift bar, we get some bend. We're effectively cutting ROM from the hardest part of the lift. So a sumo lifter, on average, if they're very technically proficient, will benefit more from a deadlift bar than a conventional lifter will. If we imagine the deadlift bar, there's some technique involved, but let's just say it's a 2-inch block pull. Sumo lifters will be able to lift more above their max, assuming they're technically proficient, off of a 2-inch block than a conventional lifter might. Many conventional lifters pull the same, if not less, from a 2-inch block, whereas if you're remotely good at sumo, you're going to pull substantially more. So we're going to see a disproportionate benefit from the deadlift bar for the sumo guys. So we're going to see that kind of gap appear where you don't have conventional deadlifters that are going and pushing guys like Kaler, Jamal, Wuzerbecki, however you say his name, Grigsby. All of these guys are relatively uncontested. Yeah, I mean, it's there's a couple of big conventional pullers out there, but they're noticeably heavier to be able to compete with these guys. Why? Partially because they're getting a lot of benefit out of the deadlift bar as sumo deadlifters. That being said, if we're talking stiff bar, we're talking IPF, USAPL competition, that gap is a lot closer because we are having to pull from a much mechanically harder position for the sumo guys, and we see big conventional pullers who are quite competitive right across all weight classes. You had John Hack back in the day, you have Russell Orhe, you have all these open champions who are electing to pull sumo. Maybe more people are stronger sumo than they are conventional, but on the stiff bar you don't get this insanely dramatic effect. I think Instagram kind of really blows that out of proportion when you have strapped bumper plate pulls where sumo guys are going to be able to add like 100+ pounds to the pull. That would be my thoughts. I mean, I think that on some level they're absolutely different. I think more people are going to pull more sumo than they will conventional. But that being said, it's not reason enough to create more division within a sport that needs to see more head-to-head competition. Especially the people who are using a deadlift bar, predominantly the untested side of the sport. Those are the guys who need to have more. We need a world champion, right? I guess we don't. I guess the tested guys don't have a world champion now that the USAPL has left the IPF. But for the longest time, the title of world champion was something that could be achieved. And it used to be the case for untested as well that this existed. And I would like to bring that back. I think it's just a goal to strive for. Because if you look at another sport that's kind of similar to powerlifting and shot putting, you have two things you can go for. You can go for records, or you can go for event wins, and they both mean a lot. Like an Olympic win, even if you didn't throw an Olympic record or a world record, is still quite meaningful. In the tested side of things, pre-split, you could go for a world record total, or you could go for a nationals or a world's win, and those are both very meaningful. Largely on the untested side of the sport, we're getting more head-to-heads, like a showdown win is kind of significant, but more or less the only objective they have is world records, and I would like to diversify that, and more division in the sport would make that less likely. So, very long take, sorry about that, but you gotta look at the implications of the take as well. So I don't entirely disagree with you. Mr. Bald Omni-Man, Coach Butler, my boy, says, opinion, most flexibility work is overrated for the purpose of weight training. You get sufficient flexibility just by incorporating a robust exercise selection. Ooh, I might disagree with you. I think it's going to vary by the person, obviously. Generally, me and Mr. Butler agree on just about everything, but I find that we know that training through a full range of motion to maximize our hypertrophy is a big deal. Most people, just about everyone, can train their upper body through a full range of motion without any additional mobility work. But if you take a relatively newer intermediate lifter, they can't achieve a true full range of motion on some exercises without some dedicated mobility work. It doesn't have to be crazy. I don't think that doing a ton of time, but doing enough mobility work that you can train your lower body through maximal range of motions is beneficial. If you're someone who doesn't have to do anything to achieve those maximal ranges of motion for your hypertrophy work, awesome. There's no reason to do it. Just warm up with the motion that you're going to do. But on the other side of the coin, if you're someone like me, I guess I'm bigger now, so I can say bigger guys, but also there's smaller guys. When I was smaller, I found that if I did some amount, not much, but some amount of mobility prior to loading my lower body, I could more quickly just start warming up through a full range of motion more effectively, rather than having to take a billion sets with the empty bar just to be able to do a decent looking set. But I guess it's person by person. I do think that some amount of lower body stretching is going to let you train your lower body in a more effective way for a lot of people, not everybody. Yeah, so kind of agree, just depends on the person, I guess, so kind of disagree. The next one, weighted chin-ups / pull-ups may slow down your recovery if you are benching 2 to 3 times per week. I've heard people mention that they fatigue their pecs. I have not experienced this myself. I haven't seen it in my clients, but I'm not going to tell you what you experienced is illegitimate, so maybe it is. I think that if you're training them really heavy, you could potentially see some impairment in your recovery, but if you're training them more of a hypertrophy style motion, I don't think that training antagonistic musculature should inhibit your rate of recovery / progression much at all. So I guess I disagree there. Squat carry over to the deadlift, but not the other way around. So that's gonna be person by person, but I'd say for most people, you're right. I would say that as you get more advanced, neither carries over to neither because you're specialized at that point, and the Basically, the more advanced you are in a lift, the amount of specificity in your training to get better is going to rise. This is pretty well documented, right? We can see every motion carries over to every other motion when we're newer, and as we get more advanced, the motions need to look more and more like the thing we want to be good at to see substantial carryover. But I would say that for most people that trend is reasonable. I think part of the reason for that is that you can, squatting with a flat back is how you're going to get most of the better squats done. You're not really going to squat with a round back, whereas you can deadlift with a round back, but you can also deadlift with a flat back. So I guess that's pretty contrived. I would say, yeah, I think you're right. Simple as that. The next one is, if you don't have goals pertaining to powerlifting, there's no reason to train the big three lifts in the most mechanically advantageous position: benching with a wide grip with a big arch, deadlifting ultra wide sumo, or hitching the bar strongman style. Squatting to parallel with a really wide stance. Lifting like this doesn't really make you stronger. It allows you to lift more weight in these specific movements. Note, I am not saying you should be inefficient with the movements and use bad form, but saying to use a form that puts more emphasis on building muscle, i.e. close grip bench press or high bar below parallel pause squats. So this is a really interesting one, right? If our goals are general strength training, you definitely have a sound argument, and I think just logically I would favor towards what you're saying. As you know, certain techniques are the most efficient way to display strength and muscle contractile property, but not always the best way to build strength and muscle contractile property and hypertrophy. I would say that probably you might want to do a mixture of them. You know, there are people smarter and more experienced than I am that would disagree. I agree with you, but I would put out there that Sebastian Oreb, Hafthor Bjornsson's coach, among other great lifters, generally advocates that even for strongmen, they do a max width arched bench press, they do a low bar, wider stance, hip dominant squat, and I guess he generally advocates for a conventional deadlift, but simply because these are means of lifting that stop us from getting banged up too badly, and they're standardizable. I don't know if I agree with him. You know, I think that if you look at his track record with Hafthor, Hafthor became a genuine world-class squatter. Hafthor became a genuine world-class deadlifter, but Hafthor was never the absolute top of the rung pressing-wise. So maybe that's because he's tall, take it for what you will. But that being said, there are people that disagree with you and I who I think are quite smart as well. So I don't know if that one's cut and dry, but I agree with you personally, as I believe a closer grip bench is going to carry over to more motions. It's going to build more strength and muscle on a per set basis just due to the greater work per rep. But yeah, I don't know. There's always another side to it. The next one is high bar squats are far better for strength building than low bar squats. Furthermore, good word, there is no reason to need to do a standard barbell squats for athletes that do not have the mobility requirements to do one. Talking about larger athletes who have shoulder mobility issues. And an SSB squat is a perfectly suitable replacement. Furthermore, again, for some athletes, they will get more benefits from a front squat than they will from an SSB or back squat. Okay, so you got a couple of takes in here. I would say most of them are pretty reasonable. I don't know if I agree that high bar is always better for building strength than low bar. I think it's going to depend on how you're built. If you're built, you're longer limbed, and you were specifically talking about building strength in your quads, yeah, a high bar is going to be generally more efficacious. But if you're someone like me who is built pretty squatty, and you're going to be upright either way, your lower bar position is just going to let you utilize more musculature, and it's going to let you build plenty of strength. I think that my low bar and my high bar look pretty goddamn similar, and one of them is just heavier, right? So, and a good example of this is Kovacs, the shot putter, the silver medalist at this past Olympics. Insanely strong, generally speaking. Throwers will squat high bar because of the reasons you said and to avoid any fatigue to the wrists, elbows, and shoulders. But he is the probably strongest shot putter ever. Did like 875 for 4 on solid squats, and he does more of a mid to low bar position simply because it feels stronger and more consistent for him. Again, he's kind of built a little bit squattier, so he's going to be quite upright either way, but I don't think that we can say that is a universal, so disagree. The next one is there's no reason to have a straight bar squat for people that don't need to compete in the straight bar squat. I agree. Yeah, I think that the SSB sometimes isn't a perfect parallel because the weight is being offset in front of you. So it's not an exact substitute, but you don't need an exact substitute because you're not squatting in the straight bar, or you're not squatting in a straight bar in competition. I have not used a straight bar in a while. I plan to get back to it eventually, but I haven't used one in quite a while. And I've been able to get bigger and stronger, and I'm sure that when I get back to the straight bar, I'll be just fine. So I agree with you that there's no need for straight bar squats if your sport does not demand it, and the SSB is a perfectly suitable replacement. Yeah, I better agree with you because I'm doing that. The next one is some athletes, they will get more benefit from a front squat than they will from an SSB or back squat. I would say they're not going to get more or less benefit. I would say they're going to get different benefit. I think that if you're someone who's got a very strong posterior chain and longer limbs and you're really trying to develop your quads, and you find that every time you push a back squatting motion to a reasonable proximity of failure, you start to take over with your posterior chain and back. A front squat is a wonderful way to force yourself how to learn to grind a squat without dumping that weight into your posterior chain because it'll drop the squat. So yeah, I think it's great for specific people. Absolutely agree with that take. The next one. A lot of lifters use bodybuilding training as an excuse for their lack of strength progress and programming. Hot take. You're my boy. I agree with you. All the time, I know powerlifters who burn out on their training and I'm gonna do bodybuilding for a while. No, you're fucking not. Bodybuilding training is really hard. You're just you're just not gonna train hard. Don't call that bodybuilding training. It's kind of rude to the people that do bodybuilding training. You're literally just saying, oh, I'm not gonna train hard, which is not what bodybuilding training is. I absolutely agree with you, Scood 3. The next one. Relative strength is a terrible measure of strength and is way too subjective with all these stupid formulas and body weight multipliers. Weight classes should be removed entirely from powerlifting. If someone lifts more than you with comp legal form, they are stronger, period. Yes, body weight matters, but body weight can be changed. It makes zero sense to complain about it, like complaining about having to train hard or sleep enough. Ooh, I've seen this one, the old no weight classes in the jungle take. So we'll go through. Relative strength is a terrible measure of strength and way too subjective with all these stupid formulas and body weight multipliers. Okay, so I will agree with you, body weight multipliers are a terrible measure of strength because they don't scale linearly. They just benefit the smaller lifter. Pretty plain and simple. I don't think that's a good comparison between lifters. But when you say all these stupid formulas, I will throw in that I do believe dots as far as comparing squat, bench, deadlift, total, between lifters of the same sex, right? I don't think it's necessarily the best for comparing between sexes, but lifters of the same sex, I think it's pretty fair. I think if you look at the way the formula is derived, just kind of basically you're taking how many standard deviations you are away from the average in your weight class, it shows relative dominance within your weight class roughly. I think it's a good metric personally. So I disagree with you that all the formulas are stupid. I think that like IPF points, they were a swing and a miss. You know, Ray Williams is like the 90th best lifter in the IPF, according to that formula. Prime Ray Williams, not just current Prime Ray Williams. Prime, like ranked 90th or some shit. He would have to total literally 3,000 to win IPF Worlds over Taylor Atwood, which Taylor Atwood's great, but he's not that much better than Ray. So weight classes should be removed entirely from powerlifting. That would just make the sport more niche and inaccessible, and I think part of the reason that we're seeing so much freak lifting is the greater gene pool that we're drawing from. So I don't want to scare people away and say you have to be obese to be competitive at the world level. I think that weightlifting is basically powerlifting, but more developed with a greater gene pool and more, funding resources from national governments, and they have weight classes. I see no problem with that. It just leads to more quality competition. So if someone lifts more than you with comp legal form, they are stronger than you, period. Agree. 100%, you're right. They are stronger than you. But that doesn't mean they're a better powerlifter than you. if some guy weighs 148 pounds and he's putting up a 1,500 total, which I think is probably roughly around top 10 all time, and you have some 350 pound guy who's putting up a 1,600 total, yes, that guy is stronger. You're absolutely correct. But to call him the better powerlifter is insane. Yes, body weight matters, but body weight can be changed. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It can be changed, but it just leads to better quality competition. It's like if you're 5'5", more than likely, then you could never be competitive at the highest level. Because if you top out your frame and you bloat max up to 350, your deadlift is going to be so wildly uncompetitive, you're not going to do so well. So it would exclude a huge amount of the people who are currently participating from ever reaching the top level, when I think there's a reason other sports do have weight classes, right? Combat sports. Yes, could that guy beat you in a fight? Yes. Is he a better fighter? I don't know. I think that comparing people of the same size is pretty fair. So I guess I disagree with you. I guess that's weird coming from a big fat guy whose brother is a bigger fat guy. I think you'd expect the whole no weight classes in the jungle, but I'm more than willing to admit that there's people who are weaker than me who are better powerlifters or better at benching or better at squatting or better at deadlifting. And I think there's nothing wrong with saying that, but yeah, I'm stronger, right? That's why I got fat, right? I'm totally okay with saying, yeah, you're better than me, but I am stronger. That in itself is a win. I don't think we need to remove the weight classes to hold that opinion. The next one, squat is the only lift that you can't cheat by cutting wrong. Most of the time for people, bench is objectively easier with an arch and a max grip. Nori couldn't bench 5 bills with a close grip and no arch. Deadlifts are easier sumo than with a closer grip on a deadlift bar, but there's no way to cheat a squat. Just gotta get stronger. Disagree with you, okay? So if we say, okay, no arch, closer grip bench is a more pure display of strength, but we could arch, widen our grip, and potentially improve our competition result. It's a little bit more complicated than just cutting ROM because we're also improving our leverages, especially in the case of the sumo deadlift, by getting our torso more upright, putting ourselves in a position where our quads can contribute more. It's not just ROM reduction. Matt Venna has a good video breaking down why ROM reduction probably isn't the primary reason why people pull more sumo. Probably has more to do with the changing of leverages, but I see your point. I would say most people, not all people, could build up a big conventional pull, which under this model is the pure strength, and then could get technically proficient at sumo, however long it takes. Not that that's an easy task, and then improve upon their competition result without necessarily getting that much stronger. Much the same, if someone has a moderate stance high bar squat that's quite heavy, more than likely they could toss that bar lower, move their stance out a bit, and squat substantially more if they learned how to do that as well. I think that there's a good argument, A, it is literally cutting ROM, and B, it's changing the leverage, that low bar is the exact same cheating that you're talking about, right? What arching and wide grip is to bench, what sumo is to deadlift, you could easily say that doing low bar is to squat. You're just improving your leverages so you can lift more weight. Most people do squat substantially more low bar than they do high bar, right? Just the same, you're right. Sean Noriega couldn't bench 5 plates with no arch and a close grip. Sean Noriega couldn't pull 730 or whatever it is conventional. And Sean Noriega also couldn't squat 660 high bar from a moderate stance, right? It's the same across the board. So I disagree with you, Jake. Not that there's anything wrong with your opinion. The second to last one, this is the spicy one. Got some people people arguing in the comments. The second to last one. Big lifts are not really impressive when the person doing them is very heavy. Example, seeing people who deadlift 1,000 pounds when they weigh close to 500, that makes that deadlift only 2 times body weight. Realistically, for most people, can achieve a 2 times body weight deadlift. Not really an opinion I hold, as I haven't put much thought into it, but I hear it quite frequently. Another example would be Max. You said Max weighs about 300 pounds, correct? And he just set a PR of squatting 605 for 5. That means he squatted 2 times body weight for 5 reps. Not particularly impressive if you hold that. If you hold this opinion. Thoughts? No insult to Max or any other lifters, by the way. Okay, so this is just a clear example of where body weight multipliers don't scale across the weight classes. By this logic, right, to be in the top 10 in any weight class below like 198, so like 181 and below, maybe 165 and below, to be in the top 10, you need a 10 times body weight total. By this rationale, there has never been a good 242 lifter, right? Larry Wheels is terrible compared to the 10th ranked 165 guy. It just doesn't scale. No matter, like, Larry Wheels isn't a fat guy. He's a big, jacked guy on steroids. He's very lean. I don't think anyone would argue he's a bad lifter. There was a point in time where if we were going strictly off of body weight multipliers, I was better than Larry Wheels. I think I totaled like 1,800 at 200. That's a better body weight to total ratio than Larry Wheels' all-time world record total at 308, and he weighed in light for that. Don't think anyone in their right mind would say I was a better lifter than Larry Wheels doing something 100 people had done, if not more. And by the same logic, if we believe body weight multipliers are fair comparison between weight classes, I am better than every super heavyweight to ever live. If that doesn't sound batshit insane to you, you need to recalibrate your thinking because I'm nowhere close. So we can just objectively observe, hey, okay, things don't scale linearly like that. There would be people substantially better, a bit better than John Hack by this logic, just because they weigh 130 pounds, right? It's a little bit more complicated than that. There's some of the fatigue and difficulty that just comes from absolute load that isn't offset by gaining some extra fat and going from 400 pounds to 440. The extra 40 pounds you put on the bar, that fat doesn't help you proportionately as much. So that's where I think, as I mentioned earlier, DOTS is a wonderful invention. I think it's very fair. It's not perfect, but it's very fair. And I think that should be the comparison. You say that you see that opinion a lot. I see that opinion a lot. Max has to hear that opinion a lot. Max is probably number one in his class now that the USAPL has a 308 division. Max is probably the best 308 teenager in the world, but to be like, it's only 2 times body weight, it just doesn't, that's not how it works. The people who have this opinion just don't understand how this works, so I don't really put too much weight in it. I don't think Max is too bothered by it, because none of the people saying that are any good at lifting weights, really. So I think that if you were good at lifting weights and you held that opinion, I think you're kind of silly, but the people who hold it just because they don't know any better, that's fine. I think, we all want to discredit people who are doing something better than we are, and if you don't know any better, that's a reason to discredit me. Yeah, that guy's fat. I could do that if I was fat. No, you couldn't. There's tons of fat guys who can't do that. But, I don't know. Don't think it's a good take. I think it's a pretty ice-cold take, although you did clarify that you don't hold that opinion. I don't agree with it, though. And then the last one, iron plates weigh more than plastic plates. Well, I have bad news for you. There's no such thing as a plastic plate. They have iron inside, so they end up weighing the same. I think that when it comes to specifically the deadlift, because plastic or rubber bumper plates are thicker, the weight is displaced further out, they are easier, right? So the whole age-old, like, metal plates weigh more. On the deadlift, they don't weigh more, but they are harder, and the more you deadlift, the greater that gap becomes. Much the same as pound plates are going to be easier than calibrated plates, not because they weigh any different per pound, but because the weight is displaced out. Well, metal pound plates are harder than bumper plates. So that would be my appraisal. So you're kind of right, kind of a hot take. Thank you guys for watching. As always, I appreciate you guys for the support of the channel.